It's a very chill stream today. Welcome, welcome everybody to Mining for Vervaeke, and today we are talking about parasitic processing, which was mentioned in episode 13 from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series by John. Please check it out. I added the link below in the description. So, with me in the studio, members of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. We have Valeria, Algernon, Joshua, and Kevin. Hi, everybody. So, what is parasitic processing? Joshua, I would like you to read out.
Thanks for having me on, Kara. Parasitic processing is a term coined by Dr. John Vervaeke to describe a cognitive state where one gets caught up in a web of negative thoughts. And this often involves worrying about possibilities that may or may not happen, creating imaginary what-if scenarios, and replaying conversations in our heads. When something bad happens, or might be about to happen, it triggers stress, which makes you sensitive to future possibilities. Your brain tries to anticipate what is going to happen in the future and determine the probability of a bad outcome. However, your brain can't take in all the information available to you, so it uses what are called heuristics to make implicit calculations.
Thank you. Yeah. What are some examples of parasitic processing? Algernon?
Well, from a discussion that he had, that Dr. Vervaeke had with Tim Ferriss, some of the examples they had were worrying about possibilities. We worry about possibilities that may or may not happen. We create imaginary what-if scenarios. We're playing conversations. We replay conversations in our heads, thoughts racing around in stupid loops, often taking a dark turn. Another aspect is overthinking. We lose control of our own minds due to overthinking. Negativity bias. We have an inherent negative bias in which we give much more psychological weight to bad experiences. As those are all given as examples of parasitic processing.
Thank you. I'm sure you guys would like to add something to it. Kevin?
Yeah, I guess.
Something?
Sure. So there's a thing, I think he has a conversation with, who was it, Eric Brown? One of his voices was Vicky. But a really good metaphor that Brown or Eric mentioned was like kind of thinking of like the kind of dark double that's like in a lot of movies and like shows where it's like, you know, the hero has to face like the complete, you know, kind of like equal to themselves, but it's like a dark shadow, you know, like I think of like Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader, right, in the tree on Dagobah. But really, it's him. Oh, you know, spoiler alert for the people who haven't watched that. But yeah, so I think that's a good way to kind of capture it in a kind of symbolic representation of, because it's, and why it's called parasitic, right? It's because it's using the same kind of thing that helps us be adaptive, our cognition to be adaptive and like exploit the environment for survival, but it's also exploiting like us, right? Like the anxiety spiral, like or depression spiral or whatever it is, right? The addiction. It's like causing this mechanism to kind of feed back in on itself in this really self-destructive way. Yeah, tag out. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is like, how does your mind decide what to think about? Because most thoughts is not, I am going to think about that, and then you are thinking about what you're going to think all the time, right? The thoughts just pop up from nowhere, apparently. So what your brain is trying to do is to predict things and to predict how to act, so you are going to have the outcomes that you want. And it does that based on your past experiences. So, for example, you want to have a good relationship, that depends on that conversation that you have, that you keep replaying in your head and trying to understand how could you have done better, what went wrong, and you try to extract something from it. Now, when your mind is like figuring out what to think about, what does it take into account? It takes into account your emotional state and your predicted possibilities for the future. So you can get into this negative spiral where you predict that things are going to go bad. So your mind keeps prompting you with all these negative scenarios of everything that goes bad. Your negative emotions start to pop out. When you have negative emotions, you're going to get prompted to get negative thoughts. And then you can see where this is going, right? You get negative thoughts, and then they cause you to be in a bad state, and then the bad state causes more negative thoughts, and then the world looks grim, and this just keeps getting worse and worse and worse, so that your agency just goes. Yeah, because the mind works with the mind cannot compute all the possibilities of. It cannot do an exhaustive search on the possibilities of what to think about, how to act, what to bring into your memory. So it just has this educated guesses that does these heuristics that Josh was talking about. And when the educated guesses are like not taken into account the right things, then you can get into this downward spiral that it's not helpful and feeds on your energy and drains your energy like a parasite. That's my understanding of it, at least. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Oh. Let's see what John wants to say about parasitic processing. Okay. Present. Also, welcome everybody in the live audience. Good to see you. And I'm trying to share screen at the moment to show a clip. Also share audio. Okay. Share. If you guys can't hear it, let me know. Okay. Is it on the screen? Can you see it?
Yep.
I have a, okay, thank you. Have a slight lag.
Parasitic processing. It's not just about bad events. This is just one example. We get into all kinds of these spirals. We'll put up on the video a recent schema for what depression looks like. It was released by some MIT researchers. Very complex like this. We call this parasitic processing because it's like parasite in that it takes up life within you and it takes life away from you. It causes you to lose your agency. It causes you to suffer. And here's what's important. This capacity for your cognitive brain to be self-organizing, heuristic using, complexifying to create complex systems and functions with emergent abilities, has a downside to it. Look, this is what you know when you're in one of these spirals. You'll know it. Oh no, here I go. Oh no. Knowing it, what does it do for you? What does your belief do? It's like knowing that I should go outside the square. Then go outside the box. Doesn't do anything. Why? This is a complex, self-organizing, adaptive system. If you try and intervene here, the rest of the system reorganizes itself around your attempted intervention. It can adapt and preserve itself as you try to destroy it. Why? Because it's making sure it's making use of the very machinery by which you adapt and make use of the things that are trying to destroy you. That's how it works.
Okay. So basically, Yeah. Oh, hi, Cordell. Hi, everybody. So basically, parasitic processing is adaptive. It's like a parasite. It uses the defense mechanisms you have, for example, I don't know, rationalization and stuff like that, for you to keep spiraling into that thing, let's say. That's how I understood that video clip. What are your thoughts on it? And it's a popcorn style.
I guess I would chime in that I don't exactly think he would say the parasitic process itself is adaptive, but it is like using like cognition that itself is adaptive to kind of exploit you, right? Because it's obviously maladaptive, right? Like people who are in depressed spiral, or like in Mark Lewis's book, which he doesn't recommend this one, but I recommend it. I think it's much better than the Mars Biology of Desire: Why Addiction is Not Disease. Lewis tries to outline this very complex argument about why he's going to say it's really a maladaptive form of accelerated learning. The learning curve for addicts is like much, much higher, and it kind of narrows, right, kind of what they're focused on. And last of delayed discounting goes very heavy into the underlying neurological mechanism, like, stuff like the occipital frontal cortex, the dorsal, I think, prefrontal or dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex, things like the striatum. But he also like weaves in there a bunch of like vignettes of people's actual life stories and like tries to tie in like very human elements with what's kind of involved in this. Notably, he does not ever use the word reciprocal narrowing, but maybe he does somewhere else. But yeah, Lewis's perspective is quite interesting and tries to address many aspects. But addiction is like an example of this, I think, parasitic processing. And then back to that interview that Vervaeke does with Eric Brown, that he actually describes addiction as a difference in, I think, degree, not one of kind, and trying to use that as like the prototypical example. Like this also happens to us. And like if you feel this gnawing sensation, about like the meaning crisis, and like you're not quite sure what's going on there, and like what the hell, that for Vicky, he would say is analogous to the way that an addict can be reciprocally narrowed in their agent relationship. So anyway, sorry, that was a lot. So tech out.
I would try to chime in then. Yeah.
Thank you. I also wanted to say, Kevin, a little bit delay. Valeria.
Yeah. So I think that the adaptive part that he was referring to was the self-organizing thing that can go either the adaptive route or the maladaptive route. And the self-organizing means that nobody is really in control. It's like almost like a crowd, where the crowd that can turn into everybody together doing something amazing, or it can turn into a mob and there is no single person deciding. So your mind is doing something like that. It's there are several processes and nobody is controlling them, and the processes themselves are deciding where to go, like a school of fish, like a flock of birds, that there is no centralized control. And it can take a wrong turn, like a bunch of sheep going around it. You get the picture. And then it can get into normally it will work in a way that fits you to the world, and it's adaptive and makes you learn and makes you do well in the world. But it can go wrong. And it can go wrong in the same way that I remember him talking about dukkha, the Buddhist term of suffering. And he says it's not really suffering the way he understands it. It's a lack of agency, that it's like a wheel in the how is that thing called? The axis. A wheel out of the axis. And when it turns, it kind of destroys itself. So, yeah. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Valeria. Algernon, would you like to add something?
There's like a lot of analogies that fit in here, and different studies in cognitive science and whatnot. So I guess I'll just talk about my own. What I see is this: how a metaphor that has worked for me, that I've come to understand this. There's certain thoughts that lead to other thoughts for each of us, and we get there's an associative. This makes me think of that, and then thoughts have emotional charge. Like every single thing in your head, every concept has some emotional charge. Some are neutral and some are very positive and some are very negative. And when you get into that negative vibe, then you can make an association not only across the thoughts, but across the emotion of it. So if you start to think and seeing things in a very negative way, and we call this like looking through a lens or something, but what thought associates next, I think, comes in part because of what we're associating through the emotional load that we have with each of those concepts, however we hold that. So we have a tendency to follow the same paths through the same logic, through the same whatever, and get these loops. And, what emerges are those graphs that what John had shown from that research from MIT on depression, or a form of depression. That like when they studied it and they had a bunch of people describe, well, this leads to that, leads to that, and they graphed it. They're like, oh my God, there's like these patterns, and everybody has a slightly different one, but like this one is stuck in addiction, and this one is leading toward depression, and this one is maybe a mania, and so on. So this idea that there's self-organizing patterns that go on in our thoughts that are kind of probably exapted from our natural interactions with the world. Don't eat, this is a scary place, don't go here. This is the yummy berries, do go here. Like we've probably exapted that to the world of just symbolic thinking, and we're the ones that determine what's good and bad on every concept. And so it's a lot more fluid than what goes on in the physical world. So the mechanisms that we use to respond probably historically and ancestrally to the physical world, we're now applying to imagined worlds in our heads, and gets us to all sorts of interesting places. And I'll hand off back to Josh, maybe.
To Joshua. Yeah.
I'll just use my personal experience here, because when I was a couple years ago, I was having really insane panic attacks that lasted for like an hour at a time, and I remember feeling like a sensation of doom, and like I was about to die. Like I would like at any moment I would just die, and collapse or something. And even when I recognize, even when I try to cognitively intervene in the what was happening, like I would say, okay, I know this is a panic attack. I understand what's happening here. The reality is I was feeling like in my body, I felt like I was actually feeling like the physical symptoms. Like my heart was racing and I couldn't breathe and all of this stuff. And like I really like it felt so real to me. And so any mental thought that I try to insert in this parasitic processing thing that was happening in my mind, any intervention, my parents telling me, hey, it's okay, it's blah blah blah, like none of it worked. Like yeah, so it just, I think that's what John was referring to when he said that it adapts, like that, the interventions don't, like one intervention is not going to stop this powerful juggernaut of a thing that feels so real, and all the self-deception is like it's hard to overcome it because it's so visceral.
The adaptive elements to doubt a lot. So basically, it's like drowning, but each time you're trying to grab anything, it leads you to more drowning, let's say.
Mm.
It's horrible. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like the thoughts could go in believing your parents, saying that in giving weight and making relevant what your parents are saying, or feeling as relevant all the negative thoughts. But the context of your mind in that moment is like, I'm feeling bad, my heart is bad, my life is bad, everything is bad. Of course, that one is real and my parents are wrong. And the conscious part of you that tells you that your parents are right, it's tiny compared to everything else in your mind. It's like you have this conscious part of you saying, no, they are right, but everything else is telling you they are wrong, and I am doomed. In the board, John had like one of the things in the board was like, I'm doomed. So you everything is giving more importance to all the negative things than to the positive things that the conscious part of you wants to believe.
And in defense of your body system, things that are scary are sometimes good to be afraid of. You know, like there are negative things in the world where you should look at it and go like, that's a negative thing, and not just go, I need to reframe it to a positive thing. That would be my stealing of the body, your natural reaction to negative things. Have doubt.
We have some engagement from the audience. Upcycle Club suggests that parasitic processing is exacerbate evaluation, and then I was about
test.
Yeah. Hold on. Yes. By the way, shout out for helping us out here. And evaluation
Thank you.
is a decrease in the ability to initiate and persist in self-directed.
I see. Without volition, abolition.
Oh yeah. Now I get it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And
So what was the former statement?
Oh, the former statement. Sorry. Yeah, we will go back to Mills later. So parasitic processing is exacerbates evaluation.
Yeah, because you're drawn to the next. You're drawn to the next thing so strongly, which I think is echoed in what Josh was just saying. Like you're just the thing that comes next, especially if these are high energy, high emotion things, is very primal to follow that. And so in that would be abolition, right? You're like, well, I want to step away from this and view it through a frame and look at it very carefully and slowly. And that is not what your mind is calling you to in that moment. Like everything else, but not that. So yeah, that it exacerbates evolution. I agree.
It was so powerful. I just remembered, like, I thought I had like a disease in my, like an actual disease, and that I was gonna die. I literally thought that, and so, and also the confirmation bias part of it. Like, I was looking at WebMD for like symptoms, and like maybe I have cancer, maybe I have this, maybe I have that, maybe I have that, and I was just like, that aspect was playing on it. So it was like psychological, all the psychological stuff John talks about, but there was also the somatic combined, and so those feedback loops. And it was just like, to this day, the experience was so real that I actually, even in the current state that I'm in, I'm left thinking like, I don't even know what that was. Like, I still don't know in my mind right now. I still have no idea what that was. So yeah, it's powerful.
A comment by Niels. Oh, go ahead. You want to
Well, I was
jump
just
in?
gonna.
You have a cat, so you have priority.
Oh yeah, sorry. Hopefully you can't hear the cat meowing.
That's fine.
I was gonna comment on what Josh was saying about the panic attack, because I've also watched interviews with people who have schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, depending on what you want to call it. But they have a very similar, not to say panic attacks, their situation is the same, but like they have a similar kind of experience when it sounds like, where they'll often describe like that they know like this is not really what's happening. Like the government is out to get them. There isn't like conspiracy for like, everyone to, make them feel crazy. But like, even though they like cognitively know this, it's like, I remember like one person, I think she was interviewed on this pretty good YouTube channel called Special Books for Special Kids. And she described like where she knew, she's like, well, I just have to ride it out. I'm just going to go sit in my bathtub and just kind of, sit there, rock back and forth. And I know it's eventually going to pass. And I just have to deal with kind of being in that state for like some period of time. And even though like, that was like maybe the best she could do, right? Kind of to deal with that situation was like, she understood kind of what was happening at a cognitive level, but it wasn't going to make it go away. Like no matter what belief she had about it, it was still going to be this kind of state of fear and anxiety and paranoia. So she's like, well, the best thing I can do is just lock myself in a bathroom and like make sure I don't do anything. And like, that's, so it really is like profoundly, powerful and interesting to me. That like things like panic attacks and psychotic breaks can have this kind of like all-encompassing. I think people can relate to this on maybe a normal level. Like you get really mad at someone, right, and you get so furious that, you break something and like what the hell, or like you yell at them, you say something you never would have thought you would ever said to this person you love so much. But like even so, it's like you just are driven to do it. And you're like, what the hell was that? Like you look back on like, I have no idea. Like how did that even happen? So at least like in a smaller level, I think there's some way for people to relate to it. Anyway, tag out. Thank you.
What you said perfectly resonates. The feeling of like you're going insane, that's what it felt like. Because I knew that what I was doing was, I knew I wasn't dying, but it's just like, I always thought of myself as like a logical, reasonable, rational person. And my conception of myself when I was having those panic attacks completely vanished. Like that thought that like there's no logic, there's no reason, there's nothing that can stop it. And the beliefs don't come like that's. I always thought that beliefs come from logic and reason and all of the like blah blah blah. It, like complete, just like not true at all. That's what I realized for me.
Kara, can you put up Neil's comment again?
Yeah.
I thought
I think it refers to Josh's thing a lot. Yeah.
The idea of protecting a belief, I think that's from being updated or challenged in some way, I think is definitely a part of it. I don't know if it's because we're like identifying with that belief and that's like our self-defense. It's like defending the ideas, somehow defending ourselves. But I think something of what goes on is that we end up with these whole belief networks where a belief in something, like our level of belief in something is intrinsic to believing something else. So they're like tied together, not just independent little things. Like we have a network of ideas, and I believe that in part because this, and this is true. So therefore that, and that all follow, and all kinds of, the more what I perceive as independent things contribute, the more sure I am of something. So if something challenges something that's a pretty core belief that's tied to other beliefs, I think there's something in our minds that goes like, no, don't flip over that rock. Like that's too foundational that you can almost like feel the rest of the scaffolding have to shake and would have to shift things. Like too many things in your mind's like, that can't be the way to go. And so we like avoid those things. Maybe that's part of the adaptive function,
Do you guys know that I think Jonathan Haidt uses that metaphor? I don't know if it's his metaphor of the rider and the elephant. Like the rider is the part that feels like you, that makes decisions, and it's just tiny. And then the elephant is everything else. Now, as long as the rider is controlling the elephant and the elephant is okay with it, the rider can tell the elephant where to go. But if the elephant doesn't want to go there, it would not go there. So when you were talking, Josh, about your like the tiny part of you believing that you were crazy, but everything else like no, this is real.
Yeah, that's the losing your agency, right?
Yeah.
You're no longer in control of the elephant. The elephant's just doing what it wants, just running around, panicking, just going crazy. Yeah.
I have a periodic experience of that every month when I am PMS, like premenstrual syndrome, where sometimes things are going to either feel like really bad, I'm really depressed, and I really believe that my life is completely horrible, or that the person in front of me, that there's two versions of it. One is depression, the other is anger. And it's like, objectively, that person is the worst, and the situation is the worst, and my life is the worst, predictably once a month. It feels absolutely real.
So basically, if I understand it correctly, parasitic processing takes away our agency. We are aware to the point of observing our life being taken away, let's say. We are aware, like, but we have a back seat, let's say. Whether it's like the state that you cannot get back from, like in case of once a month, let's say. At some point, I am in the moment, like to compare. Sorry, guys, I'm sorry. I understand that it will be over. I know already I had been through enough of it. Yes, passive observer type of situation. Exactly. I am aware that it will be over. It's like in case of schizophrenia that Kevin talked about. But I can't control it. I see that to me, everything seems righteous in a way. In case of depression, let's say, and like the situation that Josh talked about, it's harder because there is no awareness of it being over soon. In a way, it's like that thing. In that moment, I do remember this state as well. I had it when I was 18, 17, 18, basically that age. And there was no belief, not even thought that it might get better. That was the problem. So entire feedback loop was that it's gonna only get worse, or it's not gonna get better. That's the parasite in there. Yeah.
It struck me that the
So what do you
parasite
guys
might
think?
also be the that you just have to wait it out because it still kind of fits you into a this is what you're going to have to do mold, which is very restrictive.
Now, how does it just magically go away over time? Like, what? I don't understand that.
I bet that has to do with energy. Like if you keep amplifying it and feeding it new things, and like some new thing occurs to you and you're like, oh my God, like everything is horrible. And then some new thing comes and you're like, see, look how horrible. Oh my God. And then there's another thing. I knew it. It's so horrible. Confirmation bias, etc. Plus, if a nice thing happens, you're like, whatever. Cute squirrel, don't care. Whereas, another day that might be a nice video, but not today. So like if the right kind of some energy that is along those same lines if you keep adding to that, like you could just perpetuate this for extended periods of time. And I think through the same meditation, but through a variety of means, distraction, changing the energy vibe, walking outside, which is gonna, you're gonna try to pay attention to some other kind of energies that maybe aren't as in alignment with where you're at, all those kind of things. So I think it's something like if you didn't do anything with it, it would dissipate. But we are actively doing things to add to it, usually when we're in that kind of a thing.
I just realized that maybe for me at least, I think exhaustion was the antidote to my panic attacks. At least it's like you're so exhausted from panicking, you can't even think about it. You can't even think about panicking because you're done. So
Exercise. There you go.
Jesus. Exercise.
It's probably good advice. Like if you physically exhausted your body,
Get yourself
like
tired.
you were doing something all day and you got physically tired, your brain would just be like, okay, fine, let's just go to sleep. And you'd probably wake up and, all right, it's different now. I don't know if it's going to resolve everything. And you may jump right back into the same paths, but at least get a break.
I guess.
Kevin, what do
comment
you
on-
think?
Perfect time. There's something about so I can at least speak experientially to major depressive episodes, right? Major clinical depression, whatever, right? People will classify different things, but it is interesting because that one's a little bit different. Like at least from how Josh described the panic attack stuff, where it's like if you don't do anything, it actually just doesn't go away on its own. This is like a big caveat to put here that not all these situations have the same kind of remedy. And it's funny because rumination is like something you have to actively notice, and like mindfulness helps, right? Kind of becoming aware of like, oh look, I'm like doing this thing where I'm thinking about this thing, and you can just kind of pay attention to your thoughts, and they just kind of dissipate, and you don't really attach to them, or at least not as much in the beginning. And and I can also say that like I ended up taking during one of these depressed episodes an atypical antidepressant. So most of them, for those who are interested, are something called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. That's just a fancy word of saying they kind of block the absorption of serotonin, and that lets them kind of produce more in your brain eventually. That's like the feel-good, okay chemical. You can think of it that way, simplistically. But I took what's called an NDRI, so norepinephrine dopamine reuptake inhibitor. It very little impact dopamine, but it does impact norepinephrine, and this is something that very obviously 4 weeks in the treatment. It takes a while for your body to actually respond to the treatment. But man, could I not just lay in bed? Like I was on edge. Like my fight or flight was like, you got to move, you got to walk. I remember there was one day I walked for 4+ hours. I had blisters on my feet, and I was like, I still haven't walked enough. Like I still have so much of this just pushing my system into you got to move, you got to move, you got to move. You cannot sit still. And so that was at least in that situation, it was kind of effective because I wasn't gonna be able to lay around and be lethargic. It was forcing my system into oh my God, I have to move. And it's just, I just can't not, I have to. It's incredibly, high level restlessness, which is an interesting way to kind of counterbalance the lethargy and kind of, being exhausted with the kind of higher energy of norepinephrine. But yeah, so that's one thing I just want to add. There you go. Thank you.
It feels like we are so much in control of our mind, but of our mind and cognition. But I think one important thing to realize is that our cognitive processes are what is generating I. It's not that I am in control of my mind or my cognitive process. My cognitive processes are generating my sense of me. It's something much bigger than I am. And when you meditate, you try to use a lot of people who have never meditated, you say to them, sit and watch your breath, and they think it's easy. And then you sit down and you try to pay attention to 3 breaths in a row, and you cannot. And that's when you discover that you don't control your attention. It's just that you pay attention to the thing that you're paying attention to, and then it feels like you're controlling it.
I was really surprised to see I could not get to 10 breaths, hardly ever, before I'm stopped working on the counting. Oh no, I was thinking about something else. Dang it. And you try to get pure 10s, and you can make a mark on a paper or whatever and track these things and find out you're not very good at it. You can probably get better at it. But I think that's an example of maybe parasitic processing where some other thought can get a hold of you, as it were. We're starting that emergent thing from your brain, from your chemical processes, impacted by your hormones and your norepinephrine and so on and so forth. that thing starts interacting and having ideas and associations, and you're off on a tangent. And at some point, you're like, "Oh yeah, 8. That was the 8th breath I was not watching." And so, like, that's your volition there was like, "I'm going to do this meditation," and then the parasitic processing was, "Oh yeah, here's all the other stuff you're thinking about, and your leg hurts." Tag out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Joshua?
I was gonna say, like, my experience meditating, I don't know, I feel like this is kind of mysterious to me. There are like two kinds of losing agency. Like when I'm meditating, I feel like in some sense I am losing, like I lose the sense of like an ego, like that's like in control. Like I lose that, but I don't feel like I'm like spiraling out of control and just like like I'm losing that ego and that's the feeling that I have free will. It's just like things are happening and the thoughts are popping up and here's another thought and here's another thought, but I don't feel like I'm thinking. I just feel like the thoughts are appearing in my mind, in my conscious sphere, whatever. But so yeah, it's like it's like a interesting contrast from the parasitic processing parasitic processing, which is like losing agency in a bad sense, I guess.
You lose the illusion of agency. Because if you decide that you want to stop meditating, you still can, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the debate of free will and, oh, sorry, Karen, there was the delay thing. The free will and how much, where exactly we have free will or not, or where exactly our agency lies. That's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more research on that than we have the illusion that we have agency over. It's a lot deeper than it appears to us to be. And I'm not saying that I don't believe in free will. I'm not saying that.
Yeah. I was thinking there was this TV show called Legion, and at some point they had a clip about the intrusive thought. And an intrusive thought can implant into a human's head and destroy basically life. So as an example, they show the guy who during the bus ride, his foot fell asleep. And then he had an intrusive thought that this foot is not his. And he kept poking his foot and he was like, I think it's not my foot. And then he kept thinking it over and over to the point until he cut off his own foot with a saw, because he kept reinforcing the idea that this is not his own foot. And this thought was like a parasite. It like implanted, and it was using all the reasoning. It was like spreading through his brain. They showed it very picturesque. I cannot play the clip because of the copyrights. Yeah.
What?
But I can post a link. Yes.
Can you describe like what was his thought process behind, like, why did he have the impulse to like remove the foot? Like, I get that, oh, this is mine.
He said it was not his foot because it fell asleep. It disobeyed him, in a sense. So the foot disobeyed him. The foot did not listen to his commands. And so he wanted to punish the foot by separating the foot from his body. And he did not understand that by removing his own foot, he will punish himself. He was like, the thought was a parasite. This is not my foot. It disobeyed. Like disobedience of the foot was the reason. So he harmed himself because he really and the idea is like he took the entire, this process of thinking against himself. Yeah, that was the bad case. Like the guy ended up in hospital and stuff.
But is this a movie or is this a real thing?
This
It's
is a
probably a
movie.
real
This is a
thing.
work of fiction.
But
Okay.
It's called Legion.
having
It's
having
Marvel.
having read, well, I was just about to say I read some McGilchrist, but his books are very big. There are tons of examples of psychiatric examples that are quite extraordinary, where people have gotten ideas like that in their head to the point of, you know, physically insisting on amputation or something. So while that may have been a story, that kind of thing has happened, but it's not to say that everybody is susceptible to that level of, you know, like, oh no, I hope I don't catch that parasite idea and accidentally cut off my arm. Like, I don't think that's a thing to be concerned about in the world. It's interesting that I think most people are kind of inoculated against those ideas. Like, pretty quickly, some part of your brain would go, your foot's asleep. And it would dissipate. And maybe something in those people, if that story is true, you know, was failing to ever latch and overcome the energy of, no, it's not my foot, it shouldn't be there. So, but we get captured by all sorts of ideas that are less extreme than cutting body parts off. Although, and that has tendrils we're not going to go down right now.
Metaphorically speaking, it is very sick.
Metaphorically and not metaphorically speaking. But one would be
before we move to a clip. Yeah.
People with was anorexia, where they always see themselves as extremely overweight.
Body dysmorphia, yes, it's a good example.
But they can look in a mirror and they can see, and they can have friends tell them, like, you are so thin. And they still have like an image in their head that doesn't match that. You know, and there's an example there of where they're holding on to ideas despite, you know, repeated evidence from the world.
So our minds are so incredibly flexible.
Or what are?
Our minds are so incredibly flexible that the best that we can hope for is to use that flexibility to make it adaptive and not maladaptive.
Notice when we've got it stuck in a bad mode and do things to shake it loose. I would like to shout out the idea that wiggling and jiggling things, both in the physical and mechanical sense, can often unjam a very jammed situation. And I think that same thing of like introducing a little bit of shake into something mentally, I think there's an analog there. It can help us get out of stuck places.
Just really quick add-on is I was just watching an interview. I think it's called Borderliner Notes. It's a new YouTube channel I just found, which is really interesting. But one of the people she interviewed, well, actually, I think all of them are borderline personality disorder. Things like the whole niche of their channel. But she mentioned like actually like, you know, if she's getting like really upset, that she'll actually just jump and shake and like do like a big body thing. That seems to help her kind of with emotional regulation, which I thought was just interesting and a neat little add-on. Jiggling maybe works in some contexts, in some situations.
I think I meant more like in your mind. The exercise where you ask yourself, how can that not be true? Like if you're stuck in an all or nothing kind of a thinking, and the one exercise approach is to say to yourself, you know, this is what I believe, this is my all or nothing thought, and then to ask the question it and say, how can that, what would that look like if that weren't true? Like, you don't have to believe it, but consider what kind of things would be like if that were not true. And that, I think, is like that mental wiggle. You're like, I'm not going to accept it, but I'm going to go ahead and explore around this somehow.
Just harping on this idea of change and disruption and how that can change your mental states. John talked about soldiers who had PTSD in, I think it was like Vietnam or something. And when they came back to the US, their PTSD went away. And just that change in context of like, okay, here, this environment is dangerous, and your brain interprets, that environment is dangerous, and then you get all these feelings and all these associations, and then you change the environment, and then that, you're like, your brain's like, okay, this place is safe. So
Was that on PTSD or was that heroin? Because that's a similar example that Mark Lewis uses.
I actually have this clip. Guys, I have this clip. I can play it if you want. The one Josh mentioned. That example, I have it. And also the conversation about the story about the man who cut off his own leg, I posted in the comments. Here it is. So whoever likes just types in all the letters. Yeah, and before we play the clip, don't try it to. Yeah, don't cut off your legs.
If you go to the chat on YouTube, you can just click on the link. You don't need to type the letters.
Yeah.
In case somebody doesn't
Also,
know that,
everybody in the
please
chat,
comment.
thank you for. Just remember, we have a delay. That's why we talk over each other. We love each other. So everybody in the chat, thank you for contributing. And Daniel, yeah, it's a philosophy as well mixed into it a lot, as well as cognitive science. Yeah, I actually think John is both a cognitive scientist and a philosopher. Like, he's brilliant. Can't recommend his series highly enough. Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. Oh yeah, Cordell. I just like have to give a special place for Cordell because of nepotism. Okay, let me play the. Okay, sure. So that's the clip that Joshua talked about. It's about Vietnam soldiers and where it came from as well. A little bit of pre-story. It's a continuation of the clip I played earlier. It is also attached to this video in the description.
No matter where I am, this is a perennial threat. No matter what I am doing, this is always liable to happen. Now, what's interesting, as I said, my colleague and good friend Mark Lewis, we're talking about comparing this to other work that he's recently been doing. So some of you may know Mark Lewis. I highly recommend you take a look at his work. Mark has been deeply influential in my own thinking, ideas about dynamical processing, self-organizing systems development. He is one of the foremost important neuroscientists about addiction and how addiction works in the world. I strongly recommend reading his book, Memoirs of an Addicted Brain. So Mark was himself, I'm not disclosing anything confidential because it's right in the book, Mark was himself an addict in his youth, and then he overcame his addiction, then he went into neuroscience to try and figure out what is addiction, how does it work. Now, that's important because addiction, right, addiction is primarily the loss of agency. Right? It's not, I mean, addiction is distressing and painful, but when we're talking about somebody being addicted, the way we finally diagnose them is by how dysfunctional they become, how much they lose their agency. Right? So you are a video game addict if you are playing video games to the point where you cannot pursue the goals you want to pursue in your life. You cannot establish and cultivate the relations you want to establish in your life. You cannot cultivate the kind of character or identity you aspire to. If the video gaming is robbing you of those agentic processes, then of course, that is what we mean by addiction. Addiction is a loss of agency. Now, when you take a look at Mark's work, Mark Lewis, he challenges. Right? I just saw him give a talk. I've been having lunch with him, but I also saw him have just a really good talk at the Society for Psychology and Philosophy, or Philosophy and Psychology. We'll get the order right. Just this past year. And he was not the only person making this point, but he articulated it with his own particular explanation, which is his. So the point that many of people are making is the standard model of addiction is incorrect, fundamentally wrong. What's the standard model? The standard model is we have a biophysical chemical dependency, and when the chemical is removed, we get an overwhelming compulsion to have to seek out the chemical. And if we don't get the chemical, then we suffer, similar to as if we were starving from a lack of food. And so that's what addiction is. And the problem with this is it sounds very commonsensical and the media likes it. It has the one unfortunate feature of being almost completely false. Because first of all, you can get addicted to processes that have no biochemical basis, like gambling, for example. Secondly, if the overwhelming compulsion model was correct, you have a great deal of difficulty explaining some very, very pertinent facts. Most people spontaneously give up their addiction in their 30s. They, of course, get focused on the people who remain addicted, and therefore we come to believe that addiction is an overwhelming compulsion. But if you actually track people, many people spontaneously stop being addicted. Here's a great historical example. You have soldiers in Vietnam during the Vietnam War getting addicted to opioids in Vietnam. The opioid crisis! Not that it isn't a crisis, but we tend to think that certain chemicals are intrinsically addictive. So they get addicted to heroin. When they return to the United States, the vast majority of them spontaneously stop using the drug. But why? Chemical, not in the body. What's going on? Isn't there a biochemical lack and therefore a huge compulsion? Well, think about it. Think about it in terms of existential learning. See, when they were in Vietnam, they had a particular identity. They're a soldier. And they're in a particular arena, war. They're in a particular existential mode. When they return to the United States, they become a citizen, right, in a peaceful country. The relationship between the agent and the arena is what is fundamentally being altered in addiction. So Mark proposes a model that he calls reciprocal narrowing.
Okay. So, sorry it took so long. I thought that part, I remember it was there in the stream, in the video preparation. Basically, yeah, there is like he gets into the difference between reciprocal narrowing and parasitic processing. But it is connected in a way because both of them are phenomena, the cognitive phenomena. They just have different roots, let's say. And I'm really grateful to Joshua for bringing that part out. So what are your thoughts on the clip? Kevin? Yeah.
I feel obligated to contextualize this because I actually showed a very large, almost like second half of the video to a group of people, one of which was an addiction therapist and specialist in this field. Vervaeke comes off very bad to people who've studied this in that clip, which I recognize kind of why. So I should maybe kind of give some context around, like, he's not trying to trivialize it, because some people will hear, oh, if it's learning, they should just unlearn it, right? And there's a thing that Vervaeke does not go into, but Lewis does in his book Biology of Desire, which is and so he doesn't call it a biochemical dependency model. He calls it disease model of addiction. But he's basically like saying, so Lewis's perspective is that that was a productive shift, because it used to be like, oh, well, it's just a choice, and like they should just make better choices. So like get the hell over it, make better choices. And it kind of put the onus on the individual as, you know, kind of being responsible for it. And there was a lot of stigma around that, and that stigma created, like, you know, poor access to resources that would actually help them deal with their addiction. So Lewis's perspective is that like it was a positive move to move towards a disease model, because it, you know, says, okay, they don't have any control over it. It's just a disease of the brain, and like that's, you know, something they don't have anything they can do about. And Lewis agrees that that was a good move in terms of like it makes it maybe easier to like destigmatize, and makes it easier for people to get access to treatment that might help them. But Lewis will go further to say that's not enough. It's actually not quite accurate. He uses the exact same example that Vervaeke does in his book about the heroin addicts, right? Kind of different contexts, you know, they seem to be better. And it's not to also say that like different chemicals don't have different liabilities in addictive capacity, because that is obviously empirically demonstrably true. Yeah, so that's just a big like kind of disclaimer, saying he's not trying to trivialize it, saying, oh, it's just learning. It's like, no, it's actually trying to make it much more serious and significant, of like it is a deeply ingrained learning that like on the plus side can be reversed. There is a way to reverse and unlearn things. Also, Lewis in his book mentions some interesting changes that happen, like structurally, that will change like whenever the addict is in, you know, the extreme compulsion phase of addiction. But when they move out of it, the brain changes kind of back to normal. But sometimes they actually develop capacities that weren't there before. So that's kind of interesting to note. So they might actually end up having better functions in certain areas. I forget which ones, but yeah. Anyway, tag out. Thank you.
I think that's interesting. Good, Josh. Or Valeria.
Can do it alphabetically.
Okay, there you go. Let's see if I can recover it. I was going to say that I think it's interesting that we started with a, you know, as far as addictions go, just stop it. Like it's just in your head, just stop. And then we shifted to, no, it's chemical. Like you're addicted. And I was kind of sad that John used the example of gambling, because immediately when he said that, I was like, there's definitely going to be physiological endorphins going on, you know, with the intermittent reward and whatnot of gambling. So there's some bio-psycho person out there somewhere who screams at the screen every time John says that. So, and I hate to say, oh, it's somewhere in between those two, because it's not. Like it's a complicated system that has both physical and emotional and thought level things that are interacting to create an addiction, you know, that is then in the context of your life, and it's either useful or it's not useful. If it's useful, it's a habit or a lifestyle choice. Anyway, I'm sure John was making a broader point, as was the person who wrote an entire book about it. And I'll tag out to the next person in line, which would be Joshua by alphabetical standards.
I was gonna say pretty much the same thing that you said, like the idea that gambling doesn't have any biochemical basis seems like wrong. I don't know. Maybe I just don't understand what he means by that. But
I still agree with his point that there are probably things we get addicted to that don't have a very strong, like that drug component, but gambling might not have been the best choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, the dysmorphia, or, you know, addicted to. There are other examples, but I still agree with his point, just not that choice.
Dysmorphia? Wait, what? Oh, body dysmorphia. Okay. Yeah. But I would still argue you get there's still a reward system. Like if you lose weight and then you look at yourself and you're like, oh wow, I look thinner, and then you feel good. Like there's still that reward system. But sorry, I don't know where I'm. What I was gonna say. I was gonna say something else.
But if you're going to go that route, that any dopamine or endorphin counts, like then you can get addicted to feeling good, because most of the feeling goods are signaled by neurochemicals in your brain. So that I would defend John on that one.
Aren't you
But
signaling?
one thing that I wanted to point out is that this kind of just learning or just psychosomatic, it's again coming from the illusion that we are in control over our mind. If it's just learning, we can just unlearn it, which it's not the case. Because the learning is something that it's a deeper learning than us, than I am. It's something that it's not in control. It's not within my conscious control. There are some things, and then we can talk into the dynamical systems to get out of parasitic processing and the eightfold path and things like that. But just because it's something is learning, that doesn't mean that I can decide to unlearn it. Or if something is psychosomatic, that doesn't mean that I can decide, because these things are deeper than the processes that make up who I am. That it's deeper than my volition, it's deeper than my deciding. It is made by the mind, but it's made by the mind in deeper processes than the processes that I have control over. And I think that this cannot be stressed enough. That's why I keep stressing it.
Now, I'd like to add more of, I guess, Lewis's context, where like he actually in one, I forget which chapter in Biology Desire, but he mentions the Just Say No campaign. Like that's actually, that leads to ego fatigue, and this is like a thing that will, like, it's predictable for people who are recovering addicts to relapse. It's like if they're doing that, it is like really gonna, like, so. And if you want to like say like, yeah, there is some type of will or something, or ego fatigue, like whatever you want to call it, it's like that there's a finite amount of that, and so like they will actively keep restraining themselves. It happens with bulimics too, right, who are anorexics, right, who will binge eat and then like vomit. They will have like a very high capacity for self-control for like a very long time, and then it wears down over time because they just keep saying no. And one of Lewis's points about another argument why he says addiction is not a disease exactly, but it's like it's helpful to actually just cognitively reframe it. So like instead of like just saying no and saying no, I'll just refuse the donut. You start to reframe it as like, man, imagine like how I feel afterwards, and I feel like tired or sluggish, or like what I feel like whenever I looked at my body in the mirror because like I've eaten too much, or like whatever the hell the reframing is. It's like, I'm not sure that's a good one necessarily for bulimics, but like there's a way for us to cognitively reframe things, and that is kind of something we can do something about. But at the same time, it's like what your automatic response are to things. It's not something that we have control over. We don't make certain decisions about like, well, I'm going to practice this journaling technique, or I'm going to practice like doing cognitive therapy myself by like doing certain prompts every day. That's something we can kind of like the writer can kind of nudge the elephant in that direction, but it does take a very long time to do like a 180 for the elephant, to use Jonathan Haidt metaphor, which I don't think he made, but he definitely uses quite often, and it's quite popular. So it's a good thing to pick on. Anyway, tag out.
I think the idea of just saying no is so it's you need to actually work to get rid of this parasitic processing. Like you need to, it's not as simple as, oh yeah, just say no. Like if I just say no, then that's like it's hard, and I think if you make it if you make it like that simple and easy, and then when people keep falling and failing to meet, to just say no, then it's like they feel bad about themselves, and they feel it's like, why can't I do this really easy thing of just saying no? It's like, well, it's not, it's hard. It's harder than that. Like you have to put in, it's not your fault for failing, because we're dealing with a monster, right? Like it's not something you can just go like it's like you're about to battle a dragon, and then you just point to it and you're like, no. Like,
Yeah. Guys, thank you for bringing it up. I just wanted to talk about the ways to combat parasitic processing. And so there was a podcast that John had about wisdom, and he mentions ways to overcome parasitic processing. And like, if you want to know, the podcast was with, what's his name? Sorry, Tim Ferriss show. I can add the link below as well. And so he talked about overcoming parasitic processing, and it would involve a combination of cognitive strategies and mindfulness practices. Some of the ways that are: expose yourself to diverse experiences and feedback. I think that would be a fresh perspective idea, even like. Yeah, this can help you gain a broader perspective and reduce a likelihood of getting stuck in a loop or negative thoughts. So something so fresh and bizarre that can knock you out of the loop you're stuck in. Engage in reflection and self-criticism. Well, that one is pretty hard because it involves reflecting on your thoughts and behaviors. And yeah. Guys, what other ways do you think would be good? Again, there are multiple ways to overcome it. Yeah, Arjuna?
I'd have two ways. One that occurred, somebody said something earlier that made me think of this one. And that was, parasitic processing is kind of stealing your attention, and it's keeping you from having your volition and stealing your energy toward thinking about those things and holding your attention there. It occurred to me that flow could be, it's an anecdote exactly, but seeking flow, where you try to put all of your attention and awareness into something else, and thereby starve the parasitic processing, because you can't be parasitic processing if you're really flowing on something else. So if you have a way, be it physical, mental, whatever thing, where you have some access to flow, that might be a way to bump yourself out of parasitic processing loop. And then the other thing, which goes along with what Tim Ferriss was just saying, I like the analogy of worn paths in my mind. So like, I'm wandering in a forest that's covered in ferns, and wherever you walk, like, the ferns get knocked down, so you can see where you've walked. You see all the trails that you've worn because you go that way all the time. Those are all the easy things you always think, the ways you usually go. But you can turn and go off that trail at any point. You can go, I'm going to go this way today. That's not, and that, I think, points to what Tim Ferriss was saying with new experiences and things, that you don't have to follow all your normal ways of going. That's how you go.
I want to add to that metaphor of like the
Thank
worn
you.
paths.
I just, yeah.
So like because I think of like, some worn paths, like, yeah, it's pretty easy to walk off of them. But if you like wear it so down where it's a trench, maybe that's a good metaphor for like addiction, where it's like, dude, they're stuck. Like, they literally have to find ways to like carve footholes into the side of the, the trench that they're in order to physically get out of it. So that's like, I think, a good way to kind of capture this. Anyway, go ahead, Kara.
Yeah, I wanted Kevin to check out, Joshua to check out before he leaves. He has to do some stuff. Yeah, so Joshua, I have a question for you. For example, by the way, thank you for a very vulnerable share that you gave. I value that a lot, and I hope people get something out of it. What things that are still alive, and what questions would you like to have answered in that show? Maybe we can talk about it further later in tomorrow's Dialogus practice. By the way, people, I invite you. It's in the Awakening from Dominion Crisis Discord server. So, Josh, final words to you. Check out.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kara. I think some, if a single like what is the response to parasitic processing, and how does it dampen it or reduce it or eliminate it? I think that's the next logical step to this conversation. And we kind of we talked a little bit about it in the episode of reciprocal opening. But yeah, I would be interested in participating in that, and so. But yeah, I enjoyed this discussion. And bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Josh. Thank you for being here. Okay, guys, do you have more to add? Oh my God, we are symmetrical. Sorry. Do you have more to add in the field of what can we do in order to combat parasitic processing? And so there is like one suggestion from Upcycle Club. By the way, like and subscribe. Those are very, very interesting YouTube channels. Cognitive reinforcing and attentional shifting. Yeah, that's a good one.
Refocusing, he said.
Refocusing. Sorry, my English is so bad.
I wanted to add something.
Okay.
And that is, you can decrease a probability of being grabbed by parasitic processing if you cultivate practices over time. So instead of focusing just when you're stuck in the grove, it's difficult, right? But you can do things that are making it less likely that you're going to fall into the grove, and more likely that you're going to be able to get out of it more easily. So mindfulness is a big one. Things that increase cognitive flexibility. I would say it helps to have healthy relationships and people that you are entangled with in a healthy way, and to have a rich life with a lot of experiences. Like if you spend your whole day in front of your computer playing computer games, that's probably something that will make it more likely that you're going to get stuck into something than if you were like do a lot of different things, go a lot of different places, have a lot of different cognitive clues that when your mind gets stuck, you habitually are not stuck in only one environment. And then when you get out of that environment, the probability that we all know that when you're stuck in a thought loop, going for a walk is something that helps, right? Just changing the environment. So if normally you are in many different environments, I think that already decreases a little bit the probability that you're going to get stuck in those things. That's half my own thing and half real science.
I'll throw in one more suggestion that's a little bit different, and that is to do so. You can still do something that you normally do, but do it differently. I think this goes along. Valerie was saying, made me think of it. Like if you could go for a drive, but not specifically if you have a car, and if you have a decent place where you can go drive, some nice roads, maybe that you like, that are Caribbean country or near a cliff or whatever. Some nice place to drive where you're just like, yeah, I'm just going to go there because I want to enjoy the process of driving, of like going down the road and it's a nice day and da-da. And if you can do something like that where you bring a new element to something that you normally do, that you'll and look at the difference, that can be a way to jiggle and break the pattern, to use the point that Niels brought up. Like you have a pattern that you're stuck in, and the idea is to like disrupt its energy somehow. Brush your teeth with your left hand. It's interesting. If it's legal where you are, try driving barefoot.
Or your foot, yeah. No, it's like I think Dust is talking about brushing your teeth with the foot.
Yeah, I know.
Your foot.
To see how that will break you out. Parasitic processing. I'm sure you will get some insight into your
Write
body.
with your left hand if you're a righty.
There's a great one that is before you unlock your phone, watch 2 breaths. Every time, get into the habit, and before unlocking your phone, you watch 2 breaths.
What if you stay in there for hours, though?
Then it will be very long breaths.
Yes, I'm thinking.
Take the breath. Oh, before writing a Twitter comment. Yeah, Kevin?
Oh, that's probably a good idea.
Before clicking send.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess this is kind of more like specific, and this both of these apps I've found quite helpful in success with them teaching me stuff. So I think Harris, or what does he go by? Upcycle Club mentioned like develop metacognitive skills, but like people might just wonder like what the hell does that mean and how do I do that? So like being aware of like thinking about your own thinking and like kind of seeing the patterns that you kind of manifest. And a really useful tool I found is the Woebot CBT app, or cognitive behavioral therapy app. And for those who don't know, cognitive behavioral therapy is one of the best like evidence-backed treatments in psychotherapy available. And not to say this app is a replacement for someone who's very good at this skill set and teaching people, but it's quite helpful. It's a good way to kind of like, automate like, okay, like they'll give you like scenarios like, look, here's like a situation, and like they'll ask like, hey, like does this person seem to be exhibiting any of these cognitive biases, and they'll slowly kind of teach you one at a time different, like labeling or black and white thinking, emotional reasoning, and so it's so that's quite helpful if you want to get into CBT stuff, which I highly recommend. And for the mindfulness stuff, I found the Waking Up app to be quite helpful for that, mainly because it's very gradual and it starts with like very kind of simple things like physical sensations. Then it eventually moves up to the thoughts and emotions, which are the more tricky, I think, objects of meditation. But those are the most useful to use as objects of meditation, at least I found, because it's kind of remarkable that like when you are able to do this, which I don't think you can start there because I tried to start some people from there, it didn't go well. But when you can use your emotional states and your thoughts as objects of meditation, they don't persist. Like they just kind of like melt away like snowflakes or something. Like, as you touch them, it's like they just dissipate. And it's just like, and I'm using a metaphor here, as you touch them with your attention and your awareness, it's like something just happens to where like they just don't stay the same, and they can't. And that's quite helpful in interpersonal interactions. And I can at least give a small story about like, I was in a very heated argument with someone I care very much about. We don't argue that often, but like there was this moment where like my thumb and my index finger touched, which is something I normally do when I meditate. And as soon as that happened, it like was a cue to like remind me like, oh, how's my body feel? Oh, it's tightness in my chest. Oh, there's heat in my face. Oh, there's tightness in my stomach. And as soon as that happened, it just all kind of melted away. Like the anger I was feeling went away. And I was able to immediately like refocus and be like, oh wait, I'm not listening to what she's actually saying. Let me like actually tune in, actually come like, try to figure out where she's coming from. So it's much easier to get into a state of like empathetic or compassionate, awareness of like, oh, this person's expressing a need. I'm not actually hearing this need. Let me kind of shift states here. Whenever that happened, I was just like, holy shit, this is like a superpower. How is this not taught everywhere? Like, oh my, like, and I didn't know what was going to happen from this practice, but it did happen, and it was pretty amazing. And yeah, highly recommended. So the Waking Up app and the Woebot CBT app, 2 good sources, at least I found helpful. So tag up.
Okay. Yeah. Who would like to jump in, Valeria or Alchana?
I guess the last thing I'll throw in there is there's some intersection here with reframing. I'm not going to say you'd always want to do that, but that's one way I think as a cognitive behavioral therapy tool, you can frame it that way. But like, in order to reframe something, you have to step outside of it and look at it from the outside. So you're outside the frame. You're like, now I'm going to put this other frame on it. So you're just the process of trying to reframe something takes you outside of it. It creates a little door there, and that process can work. It doesn't necessarily always work, and you may not always have the capacity to do that. But something to try.
So that idea that the way that our cognitive process, our mind, our metacognition, whatever, normally works, especially if we don't train them. It's a little bit like somebody who has a lamp in their heads, and when they look at is where the thing illuminates and everything else is dark. So because where you're looking at is light, you might think that you see everything. But there are all the things that are happening in the dark, and you don't know that they are dark, because when you look there, they are not dark anymore. And I'm thinking about that prayer that they say at the Alcoholics Anonymous that asks God for serenity to accept what cannot be changed, and strength to change what can be changed, and wisdom to know the difference. There are things that are within our control and things that are not within our control when it comes to our mind. So, for example, just don't think about it, just do it, or just don't do it, just say no. Those are all things that are not things that are in our control. Cultivating mindfulness, going for a walk, calling a friend, taking a breath, those are things that are in our control and sometimes work for making the situation better. So I think one important thing that I think it's worth stressing is realizing what we have control over and what we don't. And some of the things that we have control over, the kind of agency or control that we have is like a little drop. So we have to keep doing it. It's not that I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes and then I will learn everything that there is to know about my mind. I have to keep doing it. So this cultivating of the practices, so that with time they shape ourselves in more adaptive beings. That is something that I wanted to throw in there.
I guess, thank you, Valeria. I guess I should also include that the experience I had was probably a year and a half to 2 years into meditating. Like when I had this moment of being in a heated argument and being kind of almost immediately come back down from that emotional state. That was a year and a half into this practice of doing it quite regularly, at least 20 minutes a day kind of thing. So just to emphasize that point, that the one drop at a time, right? And same thing with the CBT stuff, where it's just one little idea, and it's just all right, cool, and it will ping you. That's another thing. It's turning on notifications to be the highest priority for these kind of apps, where it's it will get your attention, and it's oh yeah, I could meditate right now. Okay, cool. Let me just spend 5 minutes doing that, or whatever it is. Oh, I could do this little, choose your own adventure kind of decision tree for the conversation with the Wobot chat app. So that's something you can, it's a very small change, but once you make that decision, it's then it's trying to set up your environment, right, to kind of give you cues on to activate those skills and to practice those skills. That's also a really important part. Sticky notes might help too. If you put them in certain places where you're most likely to do that thing, that might help. So anyway, take out.
Back to you, Kara.
So I wanted to close it very soon with some checkouts that are mysterious. I hope you guys can hear it. But there is one thing that I did not touch, but I would like to throw into the room, which is defense mechanisms and adaptability. The way the possibilities of whatever might happen next, they are really vast, and if we will go into every different detail, our head will explode. Basically, it's very and we adapt it by using sort of pattern recognitions, by having our coping mechanisms with the reality, defense mechanisms, and stuff like that. So they all had been formed in order to survive. It's the way that would keep us basically sane. But the same things that make us adapted to the reality, they also might harm us as well. And I'm thinking about the adaptability of parasitic processing and the defense mechanisms that we have. One of them that jumps out a lot is rationalization. Right. So rationalizing defense mechanism. We can logic our way into self-deception, let's say. Basically, as Valeria said in mindful relating practice we had on Friday. So I'm thinking about the thing. So rationalizing defense mechanism is the mechanism that helps us. Like we have internal bias, needs, and feelings, but we cannot cope with them because we are ashamed of them, let's say. So we will rationalize them to the point where like we can deal with it and cope with it. Let's say we want something and then we will rationalize it why we want it in a way. And I think the same process might be used by parasitic rationalization. I know. I try not to make the joke dust too. Yeah, sorry. I have to. Being here and now and mindful of the live chat. Ta-da! My point is, so parasitic processing and the adaptability of parasitic processing, making use of the mechanism that actually we have for our own survival and dealing with reality. Yeah. If you have any thoughts on it before we close, and I would like Valeria to start.
Can also invite people that are watching it later to write the thoughts on the comments. Thoughts on that. I think the important thing is that the world is too complicated for us to take everything into account when we are deciding how to act, or when our cognitive processes are deciding what is important, what is relevant. So all the time, the mind is making educated guesses about what is important. And in this educated, those are the heuristics, it can go wrong or it can be helpful. And the best that we can hope for is to educate it with the psychotechnologies, with the practices, with the things that we do, with the way we engage with the world, to try to educate those processes so that they will work better. Because we cannot do it perfect anyway. So that, I think, would be my take on it.
The thing that occurs to me for the rationalization aspect here is that we are really bad at predicting the future. And so sometimes I think we'll say, oh, I've rationally gone through this. And if I say this, I know they're thinking that. And if I do that, that's going to go bad. And if this happens, that's going to be the response. And you can be so convinced that what is going to happen at points A, B, and C in that, and you can rationalize and make up a story, and you can have more than one motivation for something, and you can only look at one of those motivations and say, that's not why, whatever. All kinds of self-delusion are possible, even when we think we're trying to be rational. And so I guess some level of awareness that we have a tendency to play games with these words. And at CBT, a lot of the exercises point to that kind of thing, like pointing at all or nothing thinking, I'll say again, where you think it has to be that way. And so when you ask yourself a question like, well, how might it not be that way? And you realize, all right, well, it doesn't have to be that way. I just think it's going to be that way. Anyway, to be careful when we think of rationalization as an escape from this stuff, that it may just be that is your parasitic processing, is endless rationalization of misperceived things. Tag out.
It's funny. It's actually one of the cognitive distortions. I think in the app they call it fortune telling, where it's like, it's like, oh yeah, you're trying to like tell the future. It's like, can you actually do that? It's it's like you actually ask yourself like, do you know like 100% this is going to happen? And like whenever you ask that question yourself, like well, not 100%. Like I think it's highly likely. Like but it's like and then another one's mind reading, where it's like, do you really know this person like was trying to do this, whatever it was, like that they didn't say hi because they were like trying to be rude and like or whatever. It's like, no, like you don't actually know exactly what they were thinking. I have met people who do think they have that capacity, and I'm not exactly sure what to say to those people. But I guess back to Kira's point about the rationalization, it's kind of funny. This is an idea I got from Daniel Schmachberger, where it's like, it's funny that rationalizing is the opposite of being rational, where it's like, we're trying to ad hoc or like after the fact, trying to construct like, oh yeah, here's why this is a completely legitimate thing for me to do. And like, I'm completely justified because he's an asshole. So like, I should punch him in the face, right? It's like, it's like, while that was like while you're getting upset and like, and as the fist was like, leaving to go make contact with this person's face, it's like, you were not thinking beforehand, this is a completely like, like you didn't do the logic beforehand, right? It's very much an after the fact kind of thing.
Yeah, it's backfitting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this is where it ends. How did we get here? Oh,
and a good example is Jonathan Haidt. I think it's I think it's probably in The Righteous Mind, one of his books, where he goes into like this example of like, he comes home from work and like something happens and he like leaves stuff on the table, which it upsets his wife whenever she gets home, and she says like, why did you leave his stuff at the table? And he immediately just says, well, I came home and like the baby was crying and that was like higher priority, and like and he gives his explanation, and then she's like, oh, okay, that's fine, right? And everything's cool. But then immediately after that, he's like, wait a second, that's not what I was thinking whenever this happened. It's like, that is a plausible explanation, but it's like, that's definitely not what was guiding my actions at the time. It's like, it was true that the baby was crying and he did tend to it, but like that wasn't like the it was not reasoned beforehand, and then like it was only justified after the fact. So that's kind of interesting thing to take note of. And one thing that's interesting with CBT is like there's an exercise that you'll get into, at least if you use app or find people who teach us stuff, where it's like, it's to actually like go through this kind of inquiry process with your own thoughts and like, oh, is that true? Like, do I know that to be 100% true? And like, whenever you do this enough, you'll realize, oh shit, most of the things top of my head are like not true. Like, it's actually like, you start to realize like, yeah, most of the stuff is just like automatic, just like, where did that come from? It's like, no, that person's not like my enemy. It's like, I don't know, but I thought that for some reason. Or like, man, that, it's like, or whatever it is. It's a very fascinating thing, and which goes back to, I think, Upcycle's club of the metacognitive skills are quite handy and quite transformative. But again, like one step at a time, and just do like, I recommend like doing one thing and picking that practice and like maybe adding onto them. And now that I think about it, I think the Woebot app does teach you some mindfulness stuff. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that as a replacement for like the Waking Up app, but that is kind of nice to kind of see how those feed back into each other in a helpful way. Anyway, so that's the end of my thought. Back to Kara.
Can I add one little thing? I think when we
Thank you.
what
We
we
are not
call
supposed. Yes.
that was a huge delay. That's a very big one. I think when what we call rationalization is when we are trying to make sense of the situation in a way that is motivated more by us keeping our faulty structures and our faulty view on reality than us learning from the reality. That's what when you call rationalization, is when we're doing that, right? We're more motivated to keep your faulty view on reality more than learning from what happened. So self-deception that wanting to be avoid of and wanting to be aware of and avoid is something that is always good.
Yeah, Mills is you're spot on, Valeria. Yeah, we do have a delay, so excuse me. Mills is also having a good point. It's preserving a narrative as well. So I think I would like to dive more into those mechanisms in the future. We are closing right now. I would like people to check out in the alphabetical form. So the questions are what things had been enlightening today, what is still mysterious, and what would you like to discuss sometime in the future. So Algernon, alphabetically.
That is a lot to put in the checkouts. About this, I would say kind of the idea of being aware when I think parasitic processing is alive and well in myself, and then trying to apply those, all the variety of things that we mentioned. Even if it's difficult in the moment. And usually if emotions aren't that high, it's not that hard. It's just remembering to do that. I very much appreciated Kevin's when his fingers touched thing for the idea that there could be like a physical thing that I might do, like the way I hold my hands or something that maybe I do during meditation, just to sort of bring the meditation moment in a bit if I feel myself spinning out of control. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. There's all sorts of topics that I would like to see us talk about. I guess I'm enjoying intersecting these things with real life, real world, I would say, to get them a little bit out of just cognitive space and more into like, I think there are useful ideas here, and that's why I'm here discussing them. So how they can be used in practical senses and, how people might understand it. That's more my interest in this. So look forward to whatever it is we come up with next. And I'll hand off.
Kevin.
But you're KA, I guess you'll go last. Yeah, so what was it? What's enlightening, what's mysterious, what we'd like to explore? That's what I've written down. Is that okay? Well, I guess something that came to mind as kind of like, I'm not sure if lightning is the right word, but like a kind of novel connection was the one Josh brought up with like panic, and that made me realize like, oh wait, there's a interesting comparison to people with panic attacks and people who have psychotic breaks from reality who are suffering from schizophrenia, and then also I guess the connection to that and like things like depression, addiction. Like there might be kind of like not say they're all going to be treated the same, but there might be a kind of commonality of like the networks. That was another idea was brought up, forgot by who, but like kind of like you have different networks and you're kind of exploring the network. And it's kind of interesting to see like, oh, which one of them, right, kind of comes online under what circumstances, and how can you remodulate the circumstances? I think that's kind of an area of interest to me, which I like Valeria's metaphor of like the spotlight, of like everything looks like it's always lit up because like you have this spotlight of like, oh yeah, well look, there it is, right? It's like right now I know I can't see the back of my room, and it's like that's just a thing, and that's I think quite interesting because it kind of reminds me of this, this kind of abstract notion that I guess came to mind of like, of like these belief networks, which maybe Matthew was mentioning. Of like it's almost like we have like these nodes and like a bunch of like dots and edges between them, and that we can only ever take up so much of them at once. Like we can only ever think of them like so much at once and have them be active. But if you're like in a good mood or a bad mood, angry versus sad, versus happy, that those like different networks become available to us more easily. And I think that's maybe in the future I'm more interested in like the practical, like what are the things people do that shift them into these different networks. And I think something that's mysterious to me is like how different recovery programs work, because that's like an interesting point that I think I got from Vervaeke of like, oh yeah, like if we think of ourselves as not that much different from addicts, what can we learn from the people who like go through the worst version of this and like come out of it? Like there's maybe a lot of wisdom to be gained there from people like Anna Lembke, who does research in Doping Nation stuff. But yeah. So I think I kind of hopefully answered some of those to some extent, and I will pass the torch to Valeria.
One thing that I'm thinking now is that there is this, it's not from cognitive behavior therapy, it's actually from the Center for Applied Rationality, an exercise called the Trigger Action Plan. And it's like, when you have a situation, you can program your mind to have something attached to a physical thing. So for example, You can imagine, if you want to remember something, you can connect the remembering of the something to something that you do. So, for example, when I step into the shower, I will remember to, I don't know, when I brush my teeth, I will remember to set the alarm. Or I'm just thinking about terrible examples. I did it with my husband for Christmas, and we programmed him to whenever his family always has a bunch of chocolate available, right? And he always eats too much. So we programmed him to, every time he reached out for the chocolate, to think about, am I going to regret that? And that made it much less likely that he would consume a lot of chocolate, which he always regretted it. So yeah, if you wanted to check that one out from the Center of Applied Rationality, that might be an interesting thing. And that's my checkout. And sorry for the terrible explanation if somebody knows the cipher thing. Yeah. Checkout.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you so much to my panel, to the members of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord server. The link to join the Discord server is in the description to that video. Thank you so much to everybody who watched us today and contributed in the live chat. I would like to ask if you, thank you, Dust. If you like this TV show, YouTube show, please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, suggestion. What can we do better? Thank you. Also, in the description, there are links to a coffee fundraise thing. I'm fundraising to help my family in Ukraine, my mom and my grandma, and all the cats. Yeah, just if you have $5 to spare, buy me a cup of coffee. So, thank you so much, everybody. See you in the next Mining for Vervaeke discussion. Bye.